Hello, everyone. Hello, Internet. Thank you so much for joining us today from all across the globe for today's very special event, Crafted Future, the Future of Performance. I'm Nick Bornstein, the General Manager of the Webby Awards, and I'm thrilled to welcome each and every one of you to today's event. In partnership with WP Engine, the Webby Awards have put together a really special virtual panel today, which will dive into one of the most important aspects of digital experiences, which is website performance. Today's program is actually part of an ongoing series, Crafted with Code, which we've been hosting since 2019, both virtually and in person. Through this series, we've celebrated the incredible work of developers, designers, and the creators behind some of the most innovative Webby recognized sites. This season, Crafted with Code spotlights leaders and creatives, some of which you'll meet today, who have built exceptional digital experiences across a range of themes. Our first panel a couple weeks ago actually revolved around accessibility and design, and today we're focused on performance. Specifically, what defines a fast, reliable, and user-centric website experience, and we'll also share some examples. So, as consumers demand faster, more efficient digital interactions, brands, designers, and agencies are all responding by prioritizing website performance. And it's when it's done right, the internet offers a seamless, responsive journey for everyone. But achieving top-notch performance can also be a challenge, especially when it comes to balancing creativity with the technical side of optimizing for speed and functionality. So in today's session, we'll explore what makes a website truly high performing and dig into the factors that contribute to fast, reliable, and efficient digital experiences with some select Webby recognized designers. I highly recommend that you go ahead and check out this season's Crafted with Code showcase and video series, which lives on WP Engine's YouTube channel. We will be sure to drop those in the chat so you can explore those a little bit later today. I'll also add that this is a really exciting time for us at the Webby Awards. We just launched our 29th season and the call for entries last week. So if you or your team are thinking of submitting your design, website, or mobile site work or beyond, I highly, highly recommend doing so for best pricing before our early entry deadline on Friday, October 25th. Again, that early entry deadline is Friday, October 25th. We'll also drop that link in the chat. So if you do have any questions, we definitely recommend visiting our website. Myself and my team are also more than happy to offer some advice. So without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce our panelists for the conversation today, who will guide us through all things performance. We have Tina Mako, Senior Front-End Engineer at 10up. We also have Peter Delaney, Director of Product and Technology at Wonder. And finally, Aruba Ahmed, who is the Senior Web Developer at WP Engine. So I'd love to bring everyone out to the virtual stage. Hello, Aruba. Peter, Tina, how are you?
Feeling really good. How are you, Nick?
Good. I'm so excited to be here. I could read off each and every one of your illustrious bios, but rather than me just read from a script, I always love to kick things off by diving into each of your backgrounds and hearing more about your work. Aruba, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit more about you and the work that you do at WP Engine.
This is the hardest question ever. So it's going to be easier from here now, right? Let's see. I have over a decade of experience, more than a decade, working on all kinds of sites, but specializing in WordPress projects. And at WP Engine, I'm part of the team that sort of, orchestrates and creates all of our marketing presences across the web. So all of our different properties, that's wpengine.com, advanced custom fields, everything that you might see sort of front facing from WP Engine. My team is responsible for figuring that out and getting it to you all in the best possible way. And I'm in Calgary, Canada. I love the Rockies, love to read, and all of that sort of comes together with my love for tech in the work that I do every single day.
I love it. And I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out the beautiful guitar behind you. You did tell me you were also a musician. And one thing that we are going to set out today to also prove are most devs also musicians? Because we also found out Peter is a musician as well. Tina, do you play music?
I do, yeah.
Oh my gosh,
piano.
3 for 3.
Yeah. We're going to just start a band after this. So.
I love it. The performers, right? Well, Tina, actually, let's jump over to you then. As a musician, but also a developer, tell us a little bit more about your work.
Sure. Way better developer than musician. Hello, everyone. I'm Tina Macco. I live in Erie, Pennsylvania. It's a very small town near a pretty large lake. I work as a senior front-end engineer at 10up, and I've been at 10up a little over 5 years, and I've been building websites for over a decade. And at 10up, I work on the front end team to make sure that all of our websites are looking great on the web and as pixel perfect as possible.
Great. Well, what an international panel too. Obviously, you're in Erie, but Aruba, you're in Canada. Now, Peter, you're across the pond. Tell us a little bit about you.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Pete, Director of Product Technology for Wander X Granite. Yeah, I'm based here in Dublin, Ireland. I am a Director of Product, so like I work from the life cycle of the innovation of technical digital products all the way through to when it goes live. Being a Chief Product Officer, Chief Technology Officer in startups, banks, fintechs, that kind of stuff, but mostly focusing at this moment in time in relation to UI interfaces, customer experience, trying to hone in on those kind of things that are needed most, which is making people happy in what they use. So that's me.
Well, you know, we're going to be talking a lot about performance today in all of its many forms. And I think there's been a really interesting conversation just I've had with you, but also we see this all the time at the Webbies, is this sort of overlap between creative and technology, and also how those two things aren't that far apart. But I think to set the scene, I'd love, maybe Aruba, we can start with you to just help us define, how are you defining a strong or powerfully performing web experience? What does that look like for you? And I'd actually love to get each of your thoughts, but we can start with definitions. And Aruba, why don't we start with you?
So I think performance in a big picture way is about delivering what the user is looking for in the quickest and the best, most ideal way for them, right? So if that means on a small screen, then on a small screen. If that means it's something on some sort of funky PlayStation connected to a TV, well, we kind of want to make that work too. And you want to do that in a way that is fast, that's going to work with the kind of internet connection they have, and really prioritize what looking for, right? Like ultimately, why do we want something to be performant? We want it to be performant so people can get what they want from the experience that you're delivering them. And I think it is this great balance between all the different technologies and design and you know, the technical, and putting that together in sort of a beautifully orchestrated way. That is really what performance is to me. But I know that, you know, Tina and Peter have even more nuance with that as well. So I really want to know what they think on top of that.
Peter, why don't we go with you? I see you nodding as well.
Yeah, like, look, we've instilled in Wander this kind of agile manifesto that performance isn't just about speed, but in development terms, usually it always is about speed. But performance for the actual user, making sure that the interface is tailored to their specific needs. That's much like what you were saying with somebody with a PlayStation on a very small TV. Might be a 4K TV, but it's still a PlayStation. I don't know what kind of browser that would be, but we'd obviously have to try and tailor for those specific needs as well. When it comes to the actual product itself, it could, based on the product, we would have a different mantra for each kind of performance latent tool that we're going to use. If it's a heavy data set, data visualization tool, load times don't matter. But the actual visualization and purity of the data itself would matter. Mm-hmm. So we'd be talking about making sure that the APIs are always up and ready, making sure that the data is 100% sound and visualized in a certain aspect, so it's usable. But then if it's for a standard editorialized website, be it headless or model view controller or standard WordPress, it goes back to the core web vitals of simple things: largest countable print, input delays, cumulative shift, all those kind of boring things. But we would have little nuances of, yeah, we want it to load in under 3 seconds. Let's take that as something that we're going to try to adhere to. Now, obviously, the client could then put 10 million videos on the homepage, and it could be 100 megabytes in size. Nothing will stop that, but we try to tailor in our certain ways that we are able to develop a performance tool, be it a product, be it a website, that can fit those specific needs.
Is that the LAB plus process? Is that what you're referring to that you do specifically at Wonder?
Yeah, so it's Lab Plus, but yeah, so we tend to use that as discovery methodology. So we would go into a business and not just fly in and go, yeah, we're going to build that for you and it's going to be fantastic. We try to learn and understand what everything is. So we try to learn their actual products as well, which is terribly interesting. Like it can be. So like if you're working today with renewables energy company and then tomorrow you're working with a fintech bank, two completely different products. The core performance rules might be the same, but to understand their products is key. So when we go in, we tend to have that Lab Plus model that we try to use different methodologies, all kind of based around design sprint methodologies and design-led development, to give better value to the end product, but also bring them on the journey as well, so they don't feel disconnected on, and they're informed the whole way through the actual development and practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up a really interesting idea, which I'm sure we'll all dig into as well, is, design and performance might mean something to us, but it also might mean something completely different to your clients, to the end user. And I know I'm asking everyone how they're defining performance, and I think it comes maybe from your own methodology, from your own POV. But Tina, I'm curious, how are you or your team defining performance? What does that mean to you and your team at 10up?
Yeah, I mean, I always look at performance as a website that is loading fast for everyone, regardless of what device they're using, where they're located in the world. And I specifically work more on websites. So for me, it is a lot about site speed. Like if your page loads slow, the user is going to leave. If it loads fast, they're likely going to stay. I mean, I think about it as in simple terms as that. But I do love hearing about this Lab Plus stuff that Peter's talking about, which is a lot more complex than my my simple view on, hey, let's get the user to stay on the actual website.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the goal of that too, right? Of Lab Plus, like let's get the user what they want as fast as we can and get them to stay and actually engage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like think of it this way: like we all know, if you're working on an e-commerce site, right? If a user is there longer than 3 seconds for a page to load, they're going to leave. It's a 52% demographic will leave. That's guaranteed all the time. The one pet hate that I kind of don't like about e-commerce sites is they have progressive loads on images, which causes a bit of a pain because people want to scroll fast through, let's just say, the Nike websites and all those kind of things, and just see, they scan very, very quickly to see what product is there and then click on it to get into buying the individual product. But if you know automatically for that specific product type, which is an e-commerce website, you know exactly what are the core vitals that you need to hit to get the demographic in to meet the end KPI, which is the sale of a product. But it would just be different for a different type of website. But they're all usually around the same benchmark.
Well, speaking of benchmarks, I'd actually love to ask each of you, I mean, how are you evaluating whether it's site speed or performance? What are sort of the best practices in going about evaluating the products that you design and their performance? Maybe Aruba, we can start with you.
All right, so you're going to hear me talk about this and pretty much every single time in anything. It all starts with the content. Yes, performance is about speed, but why, right? To me, the why is really, really important. So like Peter just said, when you're on an e-commerce site, maybe images are like the thing that's going to help people convert. So, okay, we need to hone in on performance for images. We need to figure out, like, this is what the user is looking for. That's the behavior that they're showing. So we need to optimize for that. That's the speed that we're looking for. We're not looking for the speed of like how pretty the logo looks. We're not looking for the speed of how good the chat loads. We're looking at the speed of how fast the images can get there, because that's what they're looking for. So thinking about content and defining what it is that we're trying to get to the user first or fastest. If you don't know that metric, then, yes, maybe the whole site loads in 1 second, but if most key component is the thing that's not loading first, then have you really achieved performance in context of this particular, product or this particular case study?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's it.
Tina, what about you? Or is there any sort of metrics or stats that you're considering when it comes to evaluating speed and performance?
Yeah, absolutely. We depend heavily on the Google Core Web Vitals standards. The metrics there for LCP, CLS, and INP are what we're looking at hitting performance targets for.
Got it. Peter, is that similar to you as well? Or I know you talked a little bit, it's going to be really dependent on the client and sort of what they're looking for, but is there a gold standard for you all?
There would be. So like, as everyone has mentioned, like the Core Web Vitals they do have a ballpark standard. So we, in relation to LCP, under 3 seconds, ideally 2.5 seconds. In relation to first input delay, 100 milliseconds, ideally. Cumulative shift of hopefully nothing but 0.1. In relation to the other evaluations, yes, Lighthouse is key for the Web Vitals. Page speed insights, the web page test for real world load testing is also fairly key for us in relation to public websites. If it was an internal application for data visualization or banking or anything like that, it would be a completely different case. And then it's just based on custom KPIs. So aligning with the business goals, making sure that business goals are built in as specific KPIs from the very start of the actual project. It's imperative. It's one of the most vital things that's needed for a product, is just making sure that the business goals are in the KPIs. We all know the customer might not be the business, but we attach the customer's KPIs then to that afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious to talk a little bit about this sort of balance between creativity and performance. And Aruba, we were talking a little bit earlier that you actually feel like there's a lot of overlap there. And maybe you can talk through a little bit about how you see there being this real marriage between creativity and performance. I think ultimately one thing I'd really love to pose to all of you is, how can you sort of assess when maybe like a creative feature is maybe hindering performance or not necessarily helping with speed? But maybe, Aruba, you can tee us off by just that delicate balance between creativity and performance.
Yeah, so during our conversation before the actual like live panel, we are talking about how, performance and trying to making something performant is creative, right? What is creativity? It's working with the constraints of what you've got and trying to make the best of it to achieve something really interesting. And some of the most innovation comes from constraints. And one of maybe the biggest constraints that we have are the foundations on which we're trying to deliver an experience, right? So like that's like really, really good hosting, or what are the constraints of the platform that you're working on? Or what is the kind of technology that you have access to? Now, not every project has access to the entire world of technology that you might want. So what can you like include from that, and how can you marry that with the vision, with the goals of the business, of the designers, of the brand that you're trying to represent and make accessible as fast as possible? Bringing all of that together, that's a really, you can't balance that if you don't start from the beginning, right? Start from the start from that, from the very beginning, have that conversation. It's not something you put at the end, performance, you don't tack it on at the end. It's something that it's a thread that goes through the whole project, the whole conversation. Yeah. And you can't do that if you don't have it from the very foundations, and the foundations is the tech. And that's what the devs on over here, like all of us, we know that tech, right? So we need to advocate for the tech, understand that tech, and then bring that into the conversation with all the other creative aspects that go into creating a project and make sure they work well together.
So you're really thinking of performance from day one. I mean, that's just it's sort of immediately part of your process, I take it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've talked a lot about Core Web Vitals right now, and like those just sort of standard benchmarks that we all sort of understand. And you want to have that. That's your baseline. So you have that, for example, in making sure your hosting is fast, right? Or you're making sure that you have certain performance things like a really good CDN, or having a really, really good, page. For example, in WP Engine, we have page speed boost. We sort of consider that foundational. It helps you do things really, really fast, and you don't have to do too much configuration for it. But, having those kinds of things and baking that in, that's your base. But then on top of the base, what more do we need to consider from the very beginning that would inform like what kind of design we might do, or what kind of things maybe we don't do with the design? What are the ways that we actually incorporate, like, for example, a search experience? How can we do all of that? You can't come up with an ideal solution or even a good solution if you're not thinking of performance from day one in all of it. All of it. Yeah.
Well, and related to this, Tina, do you feel like there's certain specific performance metrics that should be prioritized to ensure that creative front end features don't adversely affect the site's overall speed or user experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said earlier, it's definitely the LCP, CLS, and the IMP are the metrics that we're looking at, that we're trying to keep in mind. But like Aruba said, we try really hard to bring performance in from the very start of a project. So, I mean, that starts way back whenever we're writing functional requirements. Like, let's get some insights into how the site's performing now if we're rebuilding it, so that we can measure against those. And then it might move into UX and design. Like, let's collaborate with the UX team and the design team to make sure that, we're not putting in crazy creative features. I'm not trying to take away all of the creative features, but like, can we have one on the page instead of 3? Or if we are putting in some large feature, can we try to strike a balance somewhere else on the page, like reduce animations or reduce the high-res images that we're loading on this page? It's definitely a balance. And I also think it's conversations that we have with the client as well. Because as Peter said earlier, performance is about business decisions too. And it's, you might really love this creative feature, but is it worth the performance hit? Like, let's evaluate that together and decide what's worth having and what's not worth having. So yeah, for me, it's like very much not just on the engineer to ensure that your site is performant, but it's all of these other disciplines as well.
And Peter, I'm curious, you were nodding, but what have those conversations looked like when you are working with a client and you have to sort of weigh those big dreamed features with performance? How do you sort of manage that?
Yeah, it's true. It's a combination of sitting down and explaining what things are and looking for solutions for it. Like, even for the Luma project or the Luma Vision project itself, they wanted a lot of 3D and a lot of animation that comes in from user on scroll and page on load. When we looked at that, we took it and assessed it. We figured out, look, we can't do 3D canvas and have your products swooping around the page and all that kind of stuff. So we took a more simplistic, but even the same amount of elegance to it, and just made animated sprites in relation to their products themselves. So it's just a big PNG, but I'm able to cache that, have it load in a certain way. So when you're scrolling down through the page, it loads and it moves around based around that. And again, same thing on even the homepage itself. We have a nice transition that happens from the hero as you scroll down through the page itself. Again, we had to just kind of explain that I like to have above the fold caching and static loading of content above the fold. The reason behind that is it loads like that. But because of the animation that was needed there, we had to just kind of sit down and go, it's going to take a small hit on performance, but it will look nice. And the performance, the way they saw it wasn't about the speed. The performance was actually the transition itself. That's what the KPI needed. That's what they wanted. That's what they needed. So we took that approach and we tried to build it into the caching scenario and the performance scenario using obviously NitroPack and a few WP Engine products as well.
It's about trade-offs, right?
I know it is a trade-off, but I don't think a lot of clients even realize it is a trade-off. You know, they're still getting exactly what they envisioned. We still assess the design exactly the way it was designed through a prototype already, be it Figma or some other prototyping tool. We just make sure that when we look at it, we don't dive in head first and kind of go, right, we're going to build it this way. You know, take a second, sit back, analyze the outcome, and then just make
what's that big picture.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we try to do.
Well, you all are doing this very successfully. I mean, you know, we are so excited about this Crafted with Code showcase this season that we're working with Aruba and her team on at WP Engine. Both Tina and Peter, congratulations on being featured in the showcase this year. It's been such an exciting opportunity for us at the Webby Awards to really showcase the amazing honors that we, you know, can bestow, you know, the honorees that live in our community. Peter, you were included with your project with Luma Vision. Tina, obviously your work with the Harvard Law Review. I'd love to take a little bit of time to showcase these projects and kind of delve into your experiences creating them. Why don't we actually start with Peter? We can start with the Luma Vision project. We're going to actually play everyone a very brief clip from our showcase. We'll pull that up now.
Bringing it through standard lighthouse tests, we could see the performance was greatly enhanced using WordPress and WP Engine's products. We built it in a way that the components are light and agnostic in their particular approach, not actually heavy in relation to, let's just say, length of strings, length of code itself. And we tried to instill that within the project to make it a reusable component-based library within WordPress.
Awesome. Well, and again, if anyone has an interest to kind of dive deeper, which we hope you do, you can find all of these on the Crafted with Code website. We'll drop that in the chat and you can learn more about Tina and Peter's projects. But Peter, since we have you, why don't you just describe the Luma Vision project that was featured and sort of the concept and inspiration behind it?
Yeah, so basically we met Luma Vision as a startup. They are inventing medical devices which enhance obviously people's lives and are used in surgeries, in camera related activities and all that kind of stuff. They wanted to have a website that showcased obviously their ambitions, their current products, and is able to scale in the future to have obviously more content and more envision for what their new products will be. So with Luma, we obviously went through the usual methodologies, learned about the products, learned about their actual goals, sat down with the lead people to figure out what type of people they are, and learn about what way they do business. We learned about their actual scale, how they're moving into the US markets across a global scale, to be in fact. Then from there, we figured out that, yes, they use an awful lot of 3D. They have an awful lot of 3D artists internally as well. So we could leverage a lot of stuff off of that as well. And then after that, it was about instilling and creating a brand for them that, again, as I said, has certain mantras to their design aspects, certain mantras to their style, and we've instilled that into a lovely editorialized website. And the website itself is WordPress WP Engine. It's built off of a modular component library, which has code splitting, and the architecture is quite simple but elegant. And it is quite performant in what it needs to do.
Well, and I really loved how you used words like making a lighter experience. I think that was a really beautiful way to describe the project. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you designed all of these components, elements, typography to create that more lighter experience. You also talked about sort of creating an experience for the ease of caching and sort of the visual appeal, helping with server efficiency. Maybe just talk a little bit about how those components led to this, very speedy but elegant experience.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so like in Wonder, we do have this mantra that we have reusable components that will speed up, obviously, design, but also speed up development. Components are fairly straightforward. People like to use them rather than having templates predefined that they have to always use the same content in. So with 16 components, they technically ended up with a possibility of, let me get this right, 4,600 different combination possibilities, excluding the content that goes into it. So that means they could have as many different pages as they want, as many different things that they can possibly load on or put content into. In relation to performance, which obviously we're always trying to talk about here, we try to keep it fairly simple. Because it is a standard WordPress site, it is using components that are modular with a code splitting kind of technology built around it. Every page is light because it's only loading what the components need to load. Every bit of content that is on it is light as well because it's not a heavy technology that we're trying to instill here. So we have a fairly good CDN, courtesy of WP Engine. We have a fairly good caching system and mantra that we use pretty much across all WordPress websites. I like this particular one. The optimization of the assets and having limits on file sizes also helps to keep that down. Mm-hmm. So that means, yes, the client can go into the CMS, can build out a page with 4,600 different possibilities, but they are kept on a little bit on rails. So they're able to see what they're building, rapidly create it, rapidly put it in, without having to basically do anything with code. So they're just hitting save and viewing it on the front end. Nice and simple.
Well, I'd love to kind of shift a little bit from the 4,000 possibilities of Luma to a much more restrained, but also equally as elegant experience with Harvard Law Review. Tina, I'd love now to transition to you and your team's redesign with the Harvard Law Review. We can show a brief clip, and then I would love to talk to you about it.
At 10up, we also think of performance as a proactive part of the process and baked into every step, not something that we look at after the site is designed and built.
So some words from your colleague, but I'd love to hear about the concept and the inspiration behind the project and the redesign.
Sure. The Harvard Law Review site was very, very, very outdated. They came to us and we looked at their site, and I feel like we did a great job with the UX on it, because essentially it's a magazine, and there's issues and volumes and forums, and the past site did not handle that information well. So I feel like we did a great job of really turning it into like an online magazine. And the site itself is very like elegant. The site does not have a lot of imagery, so some of the design challenges were around like, how can we still make it beautiful without heavy imagery? So there's a lot of focus on fonts that were used and just really subtle decorations, and it ended up creating like a really elegant experience.
Well, and I loved sort of the texture that you included to sort of still keep the elegance of the brand and sort of simplicity. But I was curious, I mean, how did you approach the redesign and the user experience, knowing that it was sort of somewhat out of date, but there were some elements to potentially revive it? Maybe talk us through a little bit about how you were still wanting to preserve sort of the brand, but also expand on it.
Yeah. So my role was less a part of that part of the process as the front end engineer on the project. And that was handled more with the UX and design team. But from just meeting with the Harvard Law Review students who create the magazine, like one of their pain points was how they had to input all of the content. So one of the things we worked out for them was like a really nice copy and paste feature from their Word documents where they could put them right into the editor. The site is built with Gutenberg blocks, so it converted them to blocks. Everything from an editorial experience looks like the front end when you're in the back end of the site. So those are some like considerations we took for that.
I loved Aruba, the little thumbs up for the Gutenberg blocks. I'd love to maybe position this over to you to just get a sense of how you and your team are really enabling designers like Peter and Tina to create experiences really with performance in mind. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about it throughout, but I'd just love to hear your perspective.
So one of the really interesting things about both these projects, Luma and with the Harvard Law Review is a magazine. And when you go to it, it's really fast. It makes you think about flipping the pages of a magazine, how quickly you can do that, how quickly you can access that content. And I feel like the team really did a good job of translating that experience. And that comes from, the lightness of the way that the content has been presented and how fast it is, how well cached it is, how well it responds to the different screens in a really elegant sort of way. There are transitions, but they're not super overpowering. The content adjusts itself in the right ways for the different sizes. And then with Luma, you have something that is a very, very different vibe. It's got some really interesting things going on. There's like this cool transition with that square that goes, and I'm just like, yeah, how did you do that? And it's been done in a really smart way, loading things in very, very intentionally. And, Peter talked about that. But all of that, none of that would work if you didn't have basic foundational performance places to put your work on, to collaborate, the collaboration between the code that you create to present this and the platform that it's sitting on, the content delivery network that can make caching and take the cache content and make it show up on different people's browsers. All of that, I think, is so important. And one of the things that we care about at WP is really caring about that kind of thing and honing in on the stuff that really makes this tick and making it better so that you don't have to do some of this stuff at all. It's taken care of you. You can worry about the more tricky parts, the more custom parts, and make sure they're just going to work really well, because a lot of that basic caching, like those base standards that Peter and Tina have both talked about, making sure that's taken care of, making sure, for example, the core web vitals, they show up in the portal, they show up right there. You don't have to run them yourself, making sure it's a one-click experience to turn on like faster speeds. That's going to take care of some of that packet optimization that Peter talked about, or ensuring that scripts are working and fast in the Gutenberg editor so that those previews work really well for those students. All of those things are happening behind the scenes with products like the page speed boost, with the care and attention put in the Engine's portal, with NitroPack, which I'm actually really pretty excited about. It's a really cool team, and I'm like so excited they're part of the Engine now. And all of that is sitting underneath these incredibly custom, bespoke, and beautiful experiences that the teams have worked so hard on. But like a house, if a house's foundation starts leaking, well, you're going to have water problems later everywhere else too. So I think that that's something that we are really cognizant of at WP Engine, and we really try to make that like a priority so that people don't have to worry about that, And I think that's, without those things happening, It doesn't matter how great a job code can do. If its code is not sitting on a good bedrock, it's just not going to get you exactly what you're looking for, you know?
Totally. Well, and we're talking a lot about multi-platform experiences as well. And Aruba, I'm curious, how are developers, or how can developers ensure these fluid experiences sort of across all interfaces? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh man. That is such a gnarly sort of topic, we all know, like, responsiveness is sort of the base of that. But then I think about how, like, on an iPhone, you have to do certain things to make the buttons show up correctly, and it's different like on an Android, and it's different if someone like pulls up like a really, really tiny outdated phone, and oh no, how are you going to make it show up there? And suddenly you can load web pages on your Apple Watch, and that's a tiny experience, and you have to take care of all of that. And I think that comes from standards. It comes from taking things that are standardized across the industry, regardless of tech, and making sure that you're staying close to that. Bleeding edge tech is really exciting to all of us, but it's the bleeding edge of existing stability and existing stable tech that really makes things accessible. And like we know, why do we want things to be performant? Because we want to make our stuff accessible to the right people. And you can't do that if you're not thinking about the basic standards that the whole industry is aligned on, and making sure you're first hitting that. And I think that, when you look at, for example, HLR, the Harvard Law Review, and you look at Luma, the way these things have been constructed, that's why they're light, because they're looking and keeping things at a sort of a base level, which sounds sort of like basic, but that's what elegance is about, right? Elegance is about something that's really complicated, but is actually done in a very quote unquote simple way that seems simple. And that simplicity, that is sort of in my opinion, that's the way you have to start if you're looking at that multi-platform world, in a world where you cannot anticipate what someone is going to use in order to experience what you've created. You just have to do your best with the standards.
Well, and bleeding edge. Oh, were you going to say something, Peter?
I was going to, you touched on a good point there about different content deliveries into different platforms. I know things are starting to move away from just, it's a website, but the content is now going to be DXP'd and put into an app. Or it's going to be taking ad content that's created through the CMS and putting it into ads on your Google Ads as well. Things are starting to evolve. So let's just say your client isn't just going to one specific area to publish content for one specific place anymore. They're going there to publish content across the whole ecosystem. And that can be many different tools, many different applications, many PWAs, many apps, many different things all at the one time. The elegant decisions based around that is started from the start, making sure you're listening to what they want to do. We're starting to move towards like Jamstack architecture, so we can start to maybe take that a step further, so it's all encapsulated into one particular area. All the content gets fed out into their different social networks, their different applications, their different websites, all at one time, based on their own decision. So a rational choice of, I want to publish that content here, and then just going through it. It's starting to become an exciting area, but it also starts to become a little bit of a play on the mind when it comes to that particular performance. So I think it's interesting.
That makes me think of, syndication is something that is like a really big reason why people go headless. It's one of the reasons Lum Vision went headless too, because we actually syndicate our content in so many different ways in different places. And you're right, you take something like the headless platform or like a headless WordPress, how do you take that in a performant way and allow the client to be able to push that content in a tailored manner to the different places that they might want to do, and still be able to deliver the kind of intentional experience that they want? It's a gnarly, really intense sort of emerging thing that's happening, and it boggles the mind. It boggles the mind, Peter.
Well, I love all this future thinking and sort of setting the table of where we are today. I do want to make sure that we do have some time at the end for some Q&A, and we have some great questions already from our audience, but I'd love to maybe just ask, like, obviously as technology is evolving and growing, how can brands, clients, individuals, how can they future-proof their websites to stay performant and to stay engaging? I know it's a big question, but I guess better said, what can we be thinking about in the future in terms of how we can be making more performant websites? And maybe Tina, I'll start with you, just some of your sort of future thinking.
Yeah, I think my gut reaction to that question is actually just to say awareness. Like bringing that awareness to performance across your whole team and to the client is so important. Outside of like all of these tools and emerging technologies, it's actually just being aware of performance and monitoring it. Like, sure, let's make sure our website is performant when we launch it, but let's also keep checking back every couple weeks and making sure we're still hitting those targets we're trying to hit and not letting it fall to the wayside. So I think that's like the most important thing here, and just also that awareness in bringing in your whole team, like, because performance has effects with SEO, with revenue, with design. Like, it's not just engineering. So yeah.
Great answer. Peter, let's move over to you for your future thinking.
Future thinking on technologies. It's ever evolving. I'll start. Sometimes it's just okay to leave things alone. If it's working, don't tinker with it. Just leave
Don't
it.
fix what's broken.
If it's at 95% on performance, it's probably going to be at 95% tomorrow. So let's just leave it alone. But then sometimes when you have newer projects and there's, let's just say, thinkings about dynamic content, where it needs to go to, what it needs to be. Does a certain area need to be a rich user experience? Does another area not need to be a rich user experience? Things are moving into different architectures. I know I talked about Jamstack already, but yeah, headless CMS integration, Strappy's, WordPress, Atlas, all those particular things. Trying to decide on what particular technology sits behind that from a front-end aspect. Is it static generation? Is it server-side rendering? Is it incremental static regeneration? Depends on the publishing content and all that kind of stuff. I think moving forward, there will be an exciting space on deciding on a different, or maybe moving to a different technology that we might not talk about, or might talk about if people want to ask, but it will have an intrinsic effect on the framework ecosystem at the moment, which I think will change, because at the moment one particular framework on front end is winning, but I think over time they're going to start to settle down and everyone will have their own little place. And then on the server side of things, it's hard things. Well, I see it sometimes, and I see WP Engine talking about it as well, is like edge computing and CDN integration and where things are moving to there. It doesn't necessarily affect the person who's doing development. It affects the person who is either buying a past server solution or creating their server solution. That's where I think things will start to evolve as well. So yeah.
And Aruba, take us home before we get to some audience Q&A.
So I think I have kind of a funky answer to this question. There's something that is old that is now new, because it's being shown and being used in a way that we consider new. And that's personalization. And that's something that is really like close to my heart as something that is really about performance as well. What is performance? Something that Peter said earlier in this panel is about how, on Luma, they try their best to be light. How are they light? By only loading the stuff the user needs to see. onto the page. And that is actually not just performance, that's personalization. You have now personalized this experience to make sure they're only seeing what they need to see. And personalization, is a big part of the industry. It's like the future. But how do you know that? How do you create the information, find the information to personalize something? And I think the way we all are starting to experience personalization now, and it's just going to be a bigger part of the future, is AI. Artificial intelligence is how we learn about and personalize things for the user and make it so that they can get to what they want faster, which is performance, right? So if the faster you can get someone somewhere, that's a more performant experience for them. And at least at WP Engine, that's something that we've spent just like a crazy amount of time thinking about. What is the marriage of performance, personalization, and AI? And there's stuff that's in the works for that, but there's stuff that's out there too if you go looking. But that's what I think about as the future. Personalization, because that is performance, it's AI, it's getting the user what they want faster in the best possible way. And whatever tech we need, we're going to come up with it in order to make that happen,
Yeah. This has been so wonderful. Thank you to each of you. I just want to say thanks. I will stop asking the questions now, and I will bring it over to our audience who's been in the chats and doing such great commentary all day. Let's bring up our first question. They were asking about, when we talk about web application performance, there are several points to be aligned, such as front end, back end databases, availability, quality. They wanted to know, what is your current vision regarding team engagement, bringing all these points together with creativity, but without forgetting security? There's also a follow-up, but we'll start with that question first.
I'm forgetting security. I'll start. I might not finish, but I'll start. Yeah, I think we need, if I know in Wander, we don't necessarily think ourselves as teams. We are one product team. So we pick our skill sets based on what type of project is coming up, and they get fused together and stay on the project from start to finish. I'll move on to the next part. With new technologies, right? And some people might say no to me, but I'm going to say this. Front end is becoming the new back end. The reason why I'm saying that is simple, I won't say simple, but newer technologies like React, all of that particular work, all of that data that's being got and then displayed onto the page, and it's displayed onto a page based on content delivery, personalization, automated asset optimization, core optimization, or code optimization as well. That's all happening on the front end now. All that's being delivered from a back-end scenario is the content is being got from CMS through an API and delivered to those guys. And it's all happening on the front end now. That means that you only have one point of failure in relation to security in relation to that data, because it's being got through an API. If you have, let's just say, forms and data that's going the other way, usually with enterprise clients now, they have CRMs that take care of forms, or you're not building forms technically yourself. You're leveraging off a fairly enterprise scale entity for those particular functionalities. So even if you're introducing HubSpot onto, let's just say, a React front-end headless website, you're going to be introducing that particular form through a HS script, which is going to sit on the front end itself, which is based off of the third-party integration. So we make sure that the site can only communicate that, nothing else can communicate with it. And we hope then on the a HubSpot site, in this particular case, that they have their securities in place, that injections and all those particular nice things are taken care of there.
Yeah.
Hopefully, yeah.
And just to follow up here, and I don't know if Tina or Aruba, you guys have thoughts here, but the second part of that question was, what tools can be used to improve system observability and team rapid action? Any thoughts on tools? And of course, you too, Pete, if there's thoughts.
Yeah. Site monitoring, pingdom,
Well, yes.
all those particular things. So like our DevOps teams are always connected. We have SLAs in place for basically all our clients that we build sites for. And there is messages being sent back and forth where the site is checked literally every 5 minutes to make sure it's still there. I know nobody will go near it, but just making sure it's still there. We try to make sure that we have certain protocols in place for certain types of errors that will come through on those particular logs, courtesy of your pingdoms or your site monitoring, which holds error logs as well. And we make sure that we have a good system in place for eradicating those particular issues. So callback times, all those particular things that a good SLA PaaS service solution has, we tend to leverage off of them as well.
So, I think that's really, first of all, in terms of tools, there's so many tools. Oh my goodness. Like Pingdom, New Relic. Like the New Relic is one that I've been experimenting with a lot recently. Datadog is another one. These are really great tools. The tools are only as good as how you configure them and how you tailor them. And the only way you're going to be able to understand that is if your team holistically has a solid understanding of the vision, a solid understanding of how those different pieces of technology need to interact with. So when you find like a back-end engineer who goes away in their little corner and they do something and then they come and deliver something, and you have a front-end engineer who goes away in their corner and they deliver something, and they don't collaborate, they're not being brought together into a single team thinking cohesively, and the tech that they create, figuring out monitoring in a very tactical way can be difficult. So, and it makes things a lot more complicated in ways that you don't want it to be complicated. You want it to be a little easier, because when things are a little easier, they're easier to diagnose, they're easier to fix, and usually they break a little less too. So team vision, team cohesiveness come at a project level is so important. And of course, like, the question, the person who asked the question talked about security, all of that needs to be thought about together and not separately. When you think about it together, you come up with a better solution. And when you have a better solution, yes, you still need to do monitoring, but your monitoring doesn't have to work as hard, and you don't have to work to maintain it as much, and it will still help you do the thing that you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to throw in one final question in the final minutes. But one other question we had was, even if we have a design heavy features on some pages or homepage, with more than 90% people coming via mobile nowadays, can't we address them with AMP pages? Any thoughts?
Sure, I'll start. Yes, certainly. Take it this way. I come from a world where I think responsive is better, but that's just because I think simplistic in my nature. I'm a very simple person. If I code it once and it looks good and I make it nice and responsive, it is better. If we go down the AMP route, yes, we can deliver content in a different strategy. You could have your mobile design slightly different to your desktop design. So you could have different content delivery, even different syntax used within your AMP to be able to deliver that out. Can it still be static or from a CMS that is able to deliver it? Yes, it can. It's an approach that can be taken, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with Peter that's more likely the approach that we would take as well, like the responsive design approach versus an AMP page. We see those less and less, and it goes back to that. Let's think about performance early and often in the design phase. Like, how can we, all the way back in the design phase, make sure that this feature that we're building is going to work on mobile? Like, let's take that into consideration before just building it and then trying to solve for the problem later on.
Very, very well said from everyone. I just want to thank all of you one more time. We are at time, but a big thank you to Tina, to Pete, to Aruba for joining us today. This has been such a rich and dynamic conversation. Thank you for also making such beautiful work online. I also want to send a big thanks to our friends at WP Engine, who are our partners on this fantastic program. Again, I highly suggest all of you in the chat, online, watching this today, are going to go check out the showcase. Again, that is in the chat, so you can find the link there. And just a final reminder that our call for entries at the Webby Awards is open. So you can take advantage of our best pricing before the early entry deadline, which is October 25th. We really look forward to reviewing all of your beautiful design work. But if you have any questions about our categories or submissions, you can always find more at our website, which is webbyawards.com. Thank you again. It's been such a treat being with all of you online. Until then, I hope to see you all very soon. Thanks again.
Thanks very much, guys. Pleasure.
Yeah.